Good morning, Elap boot campers, and welcome back to day 2 of the 2025 California Environmental Laboratory Accreditation Program Conference. You've completed your first day of drills, and now it's time to level up. Today's theme is Advanced Techniques, Tackling Complex Challenges and Mastering Innovation. Think of this as your advanced training where we'll confront real-world obstacles, refine our tools, and strengthen our compliance muscles. Over 400 people registered to join us this year, and many have indicated that this is their first time joining us for an ELAP conference. So it's time for a little bit of quick housekeeping again. We're using Teams Live to accommodate the larger number of attendees. And again, as an attendee, you can't unmute yourself or turn your camera on. Any questions you wish to pose to our presenters can be done through the Q&A chat box. We encourage you to put your name in the space provided. On your screen, you should see how to submit your questions via chat. We will pose questions to the presenters at the conclusion of their presentation. We also have a space for continued conversations on our ELAP Conference 2025 forum. Join the 2025 ELAP Conference conversation by following the forum link in your registration email or head over to the 2025 ELAP Conference page on free forums. Ask questions and network at the 2025 ELAP Conference Forum site. So we're going to kick off things by diving straight into the regulatory trenches. Our first session today takes a close look at the ever-evolving method rule update, or method update rule, a moving target that demands sharp attention, quick adaptation, and a solid grasp of the details. Leading us into this essential tactical session is someone who knows the field inside and out, ELAP's Christopher Hand. Christopher is a senior environmental scientist with California ELAP, where he serves as the program's state agency liaison. He is one of ELAP's dedicated laboratory certification officers, working directly on the accreditation of drinking water laboratories across California. His role connects him with the quality assurance units at both the Division of Drinking Water and the Office of Information Management and Analysis within the State Water Resources Control Board, bringing agencies and labs together with precision and purpose. Please join me in welcoming Christopher Hand to the stage.
Thanks so much, Nak. Happy to be here again at the 5th ELAP Con. For those of you who have not met me before or heard my voice before, I'm Christopher Hand. I speak at quite a few of these, and we'll hopefully see you all in person at any one of the number of conferences and things that you all attend. But we can move on to the next slide. I'm going to be talking about the methods update rule and other field of accreditation changes. But as always, I include a disclaimer in these presentations because I put in some of my personal opinions, and I don't want any laboratory to assume that what I say represents what you must do under a regulatory requirement. I often shorten or summarize the regulatory rules, so please don't take what I say as the rule. If you have any questions about it, please reach out afterwards. If we can move on to the next slide. So for those of you who don't know, next slide, please. The Environmental Laboratory Accreditation Program interacts with dozens of different state agencies, and each one of those agencies has multiple programs underneath it. Each of these programs makes their own regulatory rules that utilize ELAP accredited laboratories. So when folks email the either general inbox or email ELAP asking, do I need to have accreditation for method X? While we know a lot about all these different programs, we're not the programs themselves, we're not their regulatory experts. So we'll give you general guidance of like, in general, programs don't do or do not require this. However, for absolute certainty, please reach out to the program in which your data is moving towards. Go to the next slide. So focusing on the methods update rule for this presentation, but this process kind of generally applies to any time ELAP's field of accreditation tables change. So I'll focus on the method update rule because that one's pretty broad and pretty wide and captures pretty much everything that happens here at ELAP and the flow. But this would apply to any of the changes for our FOA tables. If we move on to the next slide, we'll start from the top level. So the methods update rule is a change to the Code of Federal Regulations, also abbreviated as CFR. And for the methods update rule, specifically, it's modifying the approved methods for compliance with the Clean Water Act. Those methods are what they call promulgated or approved by the United States EPA, Environmental Protection Agency. Those are the agencies that control which methods are approved and disapproved for the Clean Water Act. So they write them into the federal rules in 40 CFR, so that's Part 40, Title 40 and Part 136. So for those who have an NPDES permit, you'll often see 40 CFR 136, and that's referencing where the analytical methods lie. It also has holding times and allowable modifications. So for those of you who have been asking about HOC methods and whether or not they're approved or not, allowable modifications might be part of the scheme in which those are referenced. So it starts with the federal requirements. The EPA doesn't have to build in any waiting period because not every state implements every federal requirement. So those are imposed instantly. And we go to the next slide, and then we'll come down to the state level. And the state is the one that decides which methods can be used in California. So in this case, it's going to be the State Water Resources Control Board that coordinates with all the regional boards to decide which methods should be utilized here in California. These don't include everything in 40 CFR 136. Some of the methods that are approved don't reach detection limits that are appropriate for the limits that are used in California. So they could be, the method itself doesn't reach a low enough detection limit. Some of the methods use chemicals that aren't allowed to be purchased here in California. So those don't get offered. But that list is the list in 40 CFR 136 is evaluated by the program that's going to be receiving the data. So this is the same kind of process that happens at any of the other programs where they decide which methods should and should not be used. And if they need to add additional methods, these are the programs that are reviewing the methods to evaluate their applicability to their requirements. So for the Clean Water Act specifically, there's a process called alternative test procedures. And those are coordinated at the State Water Resources Control Board in conjunction with EPA if there's going to be a statewide exemption to the tests, things like that. So if we go to the next slide, then it moves down to level 3, which is ELAP's requirements. So the State Water Board gives us, hey, we want these methods, and then ELAP has to work on our back end to make sure the laboratories can apply for these methods and make sure that the laboratory certificates accurately reflect the methods. As you can see, there was step 3. So there's a bunch of steps ahead of time that might prevent us from offering a method. So it could be that the federal rule that under which they're approved hasn't been finalized yet. It could be that the state program hasn't finished their review, or it could be that ELAP hasn't finished fixing our back end to make sure laboratories can actually apply for it. The last method update rule, the 2021 method update rule, had input from the laboratory community on exactly how this was going to occur. So we had drafts that went out to laboratories that were interested, and we got comments back, and we clarified some guidance, and that was incredibly successful. So if we move on to the next slide. After ELAP offers methods for accreditation, we need to inform all the laboratories that these have changed. So for the method update rule in particular, we had a web page dedicated just to the method update rule. We had a bunch of guidance and explanation of exactly what happened and what methods were approved before and which methods are approved now, because there's a different edition of the method that's been approved and the old one is no longer approved. And we also had a special on-site assessment waiver. So laboratories who had the old version of the method could amend and add the new method without going through the on-site assessment process if they met a bunch of conditions. We also had a bunch of email announcements. I'm going to touch on those a little bit later. And then some laboratories had specific communications from our accreditation officer, Jen McLaren, who kind of helped shepherd a few of the laboratories in. And if folks had questions, we assigned staff to help make sure that the process moved as smooth as it could be. And these applications were processed incredibly successfully. The laboratories that used the on-site assessment waiver and did everything that they were supposed to, those certificates got processed in less than 3 weeks. And we initially have planned ourselves to give us 3 weeks. We're expecting a bunch of influx all at once. However, the guidance and the input from the laboratory community ahead of time really made this rollout successful. So if we go on to the next slide, this is step 5 now, where if your laboratory wants to add one of the new methods that got approved by the federal government all the way back in step 1, those must be done with an amendment application. So like Kim said yesterday, for those who were here yesterday, amendments to your accreditation, so adding new methods, must be done in an amendment application package. The amendments to a laboratory accreditation are not accepted in the renewal package, and that was one of the most common reasons for rejection if you're trying to amend something during a renewal period. So your amendments, it's got all the standard requirements, the on-site assessment, new PTs, an amendment fee, all those things. I'm not going to focus on those here because I'm just focusing on kind of the structure and how the process moves. So if we go to the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the guidance that ELAP's provided in the past, and then what changes are likely to occur in the future. When we move on to the next slide, we have the same mantra that all the laboratories have under the TNI standard. We want continuous improvement. So the 2021 method update rule rollout was based on the suggestions and the comments from the laboratory community. And because of that, we had a great success, but we do see room for improvement, right? There's always room for improvement of things to make the application process both smoother, both when you submit your application and any future applications thereon. So one of those that were in discussion is some clearer timelines about exactly when the laboratory needs to apply. There were some laboratories that waited a very long time to actually add the new methods to their scope, and we've gotten some feedback that that wasn't exactly what they were hoping for. We also are going to work closer with our third-party assessment agencies to make sure all the assessors are on the same page, so that way when you have an assessment, there's additional opportunity there for learning what methods have been updated and which ones have been changed prior to submitting an amendment application. And one of the aspects that we may or may not include would be an additional record once you get your amended FOA certificate that documents that you did get a waiver the last time you applied, and that way if you're using the assessment for multiple things, we don't have any conflicts there. So we did have a couple of things. But for your laboratory to stay informed, if we move on to the next slide, got to make sure you're subscribed to our email announcement list. This email announcement list is free. There's no cost. ELAP does not spam inboxes with it. There are few key announcements, but all of them go out through the ELAP list. So my personal recommendation would be sign up a bunch of your staff, anyone that you think might need to know about these things. Maybe you want your department supervisors, or maybe you want all the quality team to be signed up, or all the management team to be signed up. But I recommend multiple people sign up for your email announcement list. just to make sure all of you are informed. So if we go to the next slide, when we add an updated field of accreditation table, it all comes with an announcement. So this is an example of one of the announcements, I think it was last September, where we added a couple of new methods to different FOA tables. This email was a little bit longer. It had all the specifics of which ones were changed. Like here, this method was added in this table, and this method was added in this table, and these are the analytes that were included. But at the top, it had a summary of like, these are the FOA tables, sort of broad categories of types of methods that were affected, and then these are the types of changes. So these are the kind of announcements that you see. They're very infrequent, but they are very necessary. We move on to the next slide. For the large method update rule, we had an even bigger table on our website that has every single method was affected by that method update rule. So in that rule, we had, in that table, we had both the old method on the left here, and then the revised method on the right. And you'll see some of them are approved as part of the alternative test procedure, right? So the nitrate testing using the enzyme reduction rather than the cadmium, 4500 NO3J-2018, that was a new approved method that was evaluated by the State Water Board and said, yes, it's equivalent to what we have before. And it had that list, and those were color-coded in green, and they had new on the side, so that it's very clear which ones were new and which ones were revised. So expect a similar change log for the next method update rule, big table. We go to the next slide. This is ELAP's website for the clean water rule, or the methods update rule for the 2021 method update rule. And it has all of the information all in one spot, and links to the amendment application, and links to the waiver documents. It links to a whole bunch of other things. So if you haven't been on our website, check it out. It's got a lot of important information there. The next announcement will have a link to this website as well. So if we go to the next slide. So somebody yesterday asked in one of the questions about standard methods and their naming convention and how methods were named, and just deciphering the addition that they have and comparing that to which methods ELAP offered on our FOA table. And they're correct. There are some standard methods that are in multiple editions of standard methods. And so this fact sheet, it's on our ELAP's webpage under guidance documents. Or forms. I think you can get there through forms and templates or something like that. And there's a guidance method naming convention fact sheet for laboratories, and it describes what each number part includes in standard methods when there's that standard methods number, blah, 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 and what all those pieces refer to. It also covers ASTM and US EPA, kind of what those names look like and why ELAP has chosen the names that we do. Next slide, please. So that next method update rule, there's actually two of them. For those of you who are unaware, there's one of them that has been promulgated and approved now, so it's in the CFR, and EPA has called it Routine Methods Update Rule 2. It's very similar to the 2021 method update rule. It's mostly updates to methods that are already there, and there's a few ATPs that are approved. So for those of you who do dioxins testing, one of the ATPs is utilizing an instrument other than a high-res GCMS, which could be great, right? It might have more folks doing dioxins testing and might make it a little bit easier. But in general, this rule moved all standard method references to the 24th edition. So if personal recommendation, if you don't have a copy of the 24th edition, grab one. The other method update rule is a proposed rule, so it's not promulgated. The EPA has not finalized it, and they confusingly call it MUR 22. Not really sure why they're calling it 22, but This is a more significant change. It has a bunch of analytes being added, one of those being PFAS. So the ELAP already offers that one, right, because the State Water Board requests it. But this PFAS would be added to the Clean Water Act rule, and it would be added to 40 CFR 136. Another huge change in this one is how PCBs are going to be regulated. Instead of using the existing methods, there's a different method that's out there, and these is still in discussion. It's less clear to ELAP. It's less clear to the State Water Board exactly how this is going to be rolled out, and how the federal administration change is going to affect the rule implementation and promulgation. I've heard two sides. One says it's moving through, and the other side says it's going to get repealed. So I can't answer anything for the federal government. I'm sorry, but I don't have any insights into that. But either way, if we move on to the next slide, a couple suggestions to get your laboratory prepared. So for those of you that are under NPDES permits, look at the ECFR. So if you type in 40 CFR 136.3, that's often the first link in any search engine. It points to the ECFR. That's the unofficial version of the Federal Register that's updated as soon as the methods are promulgated. And it points out all the methods that are changed and exactly what's laid out and what's approved. So those are pointing to which methods are going to be updated. And if you take a look there, you'll see some of the methods are approved, newer method versions of standard methods and ASTM methods. So those are the most common ones that get updated. There were a couple bacteria ones that got updated in the last method update rule. I think there are a couple of EPA methods that are going to get updated here as well. But for those of you who need a copy of standard methods, all of the quality assurance and quality control sections are available from standard methods for free. You don't need to purchase any of the newer editions. So if you don't have a copy, you can easily obtain the QC sections on their own. So 9020, for example, straight from standard methods website. I would take a look at the new methods and evaluate what is changing versus what you already do. A lot of the laboratories that I've talked to already do 99% of what's required in those method changes. That's why we had a special on-site assessment waiver during the last one, is because the changes were not so great that the laboratory required another assessment. So we had a waiver process there. And when you're doing this review, document it. Make it count as your part of your internal audit. Hey, we looked at the newer version of standard methods, and we made sure that everything was changed and everything that needed to be updated was updated. When those procedure parts of your SOP change, you gotta make sure your laboratory staff is trained and aware of any of those changes that were required, and document that too. Keep it as part of your internal audit. Keep it as part of your routine training documents. And then, of course, sign up for announcements on ELAP's webpage. So all of these should help you be prepared for the next method update rule when it gets announced. Going on the next slide, this is the close of my presentation. I think I'm keeping it on time. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in chat. I will be answering them throughout the webinar, as I did yesterday. Our general inbox is usually the fastest to get a response. So elapca@waterboards.ca.gov. We do have other technical inboxes and PT specific inboxes, but the general inbox will forward those on to your to a relevant staff member who can help with your specific question. And if you need a phone call, send the email. We can assign a staff and schedule somebody who's going to be the most helpful, relevant to your question. We want you to succeed, but we need to have some time to help you through. And with that, that closes my slide. I have one for question and answer. I do see at least one in the chat, so I know folks have been asking me for questions, so go ahead.
Chris, question number 1. How do we apply for a variance from a new method rule update, such as the prescribed QC not being appropriate for testing performed in the lab?
So that's kind of a broad question, and I'm not going to be able to give a broad answer to that. So it depends on what you're doing. So for some of the methods, typically it's not QC that's excluded, but it might be. If you look at 40 CFR 136.6, that is the section of the CFR that has allowed exceptions for Clean Water Act testing, so non-compliance or non-potable water sample testing. And so it might be that is the section you're looking at in terms of getting approved for a variance. So for those, you have like they'll have, you must do these specific conditions, but these are the things you cannot change at all. And so it'll list out like method defined parameters like total suspended solids. You can't change the temperature of your ovens for those, right? Because then you're not testing total suspended solids anymore. So that might be one of those areas where you can't change it, sorry. But look in that section, that might give you some better guidance onto what you can and can't change. And it also has rules for how you need to document and communicate that to your testing partners, so who you're providing the testing to. Hey, client, I am modifying this method under allowed by 40 CFR 136.6. I hope that answered it. But if not, please email your specific question to the ELAP and we'll get back to you.
Okay, Chris, question number 2. If I want to add a method to our lab's FOAs, I can't add it during the regular renewal. It must be in a separate quote and unquote amended application, correct?
Right. So renewal applications are designed to be only for renewing what you currently have on your certificate. So that's why it's locked down so much, is because we have a tight deadline. We want to get your certificate before your current one expires. And so amending anything, those amendments might take longer for us, our staff to review. We might have more questions. And so the renewal application, to try to make that process as speedy as possible, we only want you to renew for methods you already have in your scope. It's one of the regulatory requirements. You must amend. You must submit an amendment application if you're going to add any method to your certificate.
Question number 3, it's not MUR related, but it's technology related. High resolution mass specs are becoming obsolete. New technologies such as GCMS triple quads are becoming more common. Are you, California ELAP, considering offering modified 8290, 1613, and 1668 methods?
Yeah, so this goes back to it depends on what program is and how they're going to allow it. So we don't approve specific methods for use for specific methods. But those 2 alternatives to the high-res GCMS, there's 2 methods. Let's see, what if I can remember what they are. There's 2 methods that are approved as alternative test procedures. So under the alternative test procedure, those go through EPA's review to make sure they're identical to or equivalent to the methods that are offered for accreditation. So it wouldn't be necessarily a modified 1613 method that would be approved under the Clean Water Act. I believe the methods are like 16130, and they have 2 names on them. So there's like SGS, that Access, that helped develop one, and then Pace Analytical helped develop another one. So I don't remember exactly what the acronyms are for both of those 2 approved alternatives, that ELAP will be offering in the future. So keep a lookout. We're going to be adding those to our list. And again, you'll need to amend those. So you'll need to submit an amendment application. You'll need to have an on-site assessment where those were reviewed in your lab. You'll need to have PTs using those methods, et cetera, et cetera. So keep an eye out. Sign up for the email announcements.
Okay, question number 4. Please provide the new method for dioxin furan other than HRGC. Is it accepted by ELAP?
Yeah, so those are the ones that will be approved and that are likely to pass the State Water Board's review. They're like 16130. There's 2 methods, and they are both available online. I don't remember the exact number. I'll look it up and I'll respond to chat, give you a specific reference. But they're in 136.3.
Okay, question number 5. How is California ELAP going to move forward with crypto Giardia assessments? EPA let it go. The state of Wisconsin might not be providing samples for labs to perform the tests for the assessor. Treat it like another microbiology method. Keep the checklists. Labs and assessors could use some guidance.
Yeah, so this is one of those areas that is a small number of laboratories that still perform cryptosporidium and Giardia. And this is my personal recommendation to you is reach out to your regulatory authority. The question, the person asking the question is very aware of the issues that are surrounding those 2 methods and why it may not be required to be tested. But ELAP doesn't approve specific methods, so that one might be a good one to reach out to us via email to get a better idea.
Awesome. Question number 6. In the 2024 MUR, when will ELAP not offer the previous methods?
I don't have a specific date for you. So that will be posted on our website of we'll offer these methods until this date, and we'll give some general guidance like the existing one has of after a certain date when you apply, this will happen, and before a certain date, this will apply, and et cetera, et cetera. So that will be on the website. If you want to get a rough idea, I would take a look at our 2021 method update rule webpage. All that information is still available. That'll kind of help you for planning purposes, but I would encourage you to purchase the next standard methods and figure out which methods need to be updated in your lab.
Question number 7. Is there an estimate as to when ELAP will amend FOA lists to incorporate the methods listed in our MUR2?
So that's kind of the same as the previous one. I don't have a specific date of when exactly everything will happen. So there's still a couple of things that we need to iron out on ELAP's end to make sure when we roll this out that we have a consistent message and it moves as smoothly as the last one did. So sign up to their email subscription list to be informed.
Okay, Chris, I think we're good. Thank you so much for fielding those questions. We are, thank you so much for providing that information about the MUR update. So let's move forward. Next in our bootcamp agenda, we'll break down the difference between 2 essential quality tools, internal audits and management reviews. Think of this session as choosing the right gear for the mission. To guide us through this important relationship, please welcome Mohan Sabaratam from IAS International Accreditation Service. Mohan brings a wealth of expertise in auditing and quality management, helping labs ensure their systems aren't just meeting standards, but continuously improving. He has worked in the scientific and accreditation industry for more than 35 years, with 14 years as a senior staff with IAS. He is a trainer and assessor in laboratories, product certification, inspection, personnel certification, and Management System Certification Body Accreditation Standards. Let's give a warm welcome to Mohan as he breaks down how effective management reviews and internal audits can drive real progress in environmental laboratories.
Hi, good morning. Hi, Leanne. Hi, Lou. Can you hear me well? Good. Okay. Yeah. Do I need to have my camera on, or may I just? I don't need to, right? Okay, great. Yeah. Okay, wonderful. So my topic is going to be the relationship between management review and internal audit, and I am going to try to explain to you the dry subject of management review and internal audit into something that you could use on a daily basis, because we do this actually on our everyday lives. It's just that when we come to the lab, we say, hey, we may not need this, but you need it more in the lab than in other aspects. So the next slide, please. So just very quickly, I want to just tell you a little bit about IAS. There's just a one slider. There's not much more. I just wanted to tell you that we are based in Brea, California. We've been providing accreditation since 1975. We are considered the oldest accreditation in the US serving the global market. We have recognized ILAC IF and APAC signatory approvals. These are international accreditation conglomerations, and you have Asia Pacific, APAC, which is another big one. So some of the non-governmental accreditation bodies are also signatories to these organizations. We have customer responsiveness, technical excellence. We are a TNI non-governmental accreditation body, and we do accredit labs to the TNI standard as well. So IAS currently runs about 24 main accreditation programs. That's for main standards like 17025, 17020, and things like that. But under some of these main accreditation programs, we have other sub-programs like testing laboratory. We have the California Elap program under our testing laboratory program. We have forensic and so on and so forth. We have the FDA. So those are sub-programs under our main testing programs. Those are some of the links that that we have. If you ever need to look us up, need to talk to us, you need to search for accredited bodies besides California ELAB. The next slide, please. So start with management review, and I'll try to build the management review, how you say, platform, and then introduce internal audit at the next set of slides. So so management review is a powerful tool for continual improvement. So when you are in the lab and you know that once a year or anytime during the year, you've been called upon to sit into a meeting where there is a management review going on, and you're wondering, why do I have to sit here? I've got 200 samples to finish by the end of this week, so I don't have time for this. But the management review is a powerful tool for continual improvement. Okay, excellence is a continuous process and not an accident. So you have to work hard towards getting that excellence, and it just doesn't happen. These are the words of Deming. He's an American quality guru who invented total quality management, TQM. The next slide, please. Now, these are some of the reasons that you want to have a management review. You want to make sure that the top management are normally this is called upon by the top management, and that is they do it on a periodic level. They want to cover quality and technical management system of the lab. They want to ensure that there is a continuity, suitability of what you're doing to the methods that you have, the adequacy, the effectiveness. Are you giving results that are constantly okay? Are you giving results that are constantly wrong? These are some of the things that you need to do so that you can make sure that on the broad scale of things, that you are meeting objectives, you're meeting your targets, and you are making sure that your policies are being amended so that you can keep up to date with all of those things. So you can't do that when you're sitting on your bench, because you're just looking at what you're doing. But from a top level, from a bird's viewpoint, you are seeing a complete picture of where the changes need to happen. Next slide, please. So this is the general agenda for management review. You'll find it in the volume 1, module 2 of the TNI. I think it could be 415 clause, if not mistaken. And this is just the general agenda. You're not fixed by this agenda. You could add more things into it. Like, for instance, I'm not seeing risk, for example. You could include risk in there and talk that as part of your complete management review. Now, I highlighted recent internal audits. So during management review, you will have to make sure that internal audits, the internal audits were completed, the closures were done or closures were in progress, and the current status of your internal audits. Those are a requirement under one of the agenda for management review. And that's what an accreditation body assessor will be looking for. He will be looking if these issues were discussed during your management review and how far in depth you went to these. The next slide, please. The MR process. So the MR process, we have another presenter who would be talking about how they do their MR. But however, I just want to take you through the steps so that we are all on the same page. And that is, you have to plan the meeting sufficiently in advance. Generally, it's good to include all levels of staff, right? You just don't keep it within top management and the rest of the staff are not able to see exactly what's being done, or there is no trickle down effect of the hard work the top management may be doing to try to get everything efficient. Supervisors will collect feedbacks. So you have the agenda that we showed before. These agenda items would require you to collect a lot of data. So the supervisors would go back and collect feedbacks from employees, because you employees who are on the ground, you know the best, right? You know exactly what is going on and what are the problems are sometimes. So then you prepare an agenda. Normally the MR process is completed by the quality manager of the laboratory. He would or she would prepare the agenda and then detail the agenda items, collect all the materials, and then be ready to hold the meeting. And most importantly, you must record the minutes, because this is what an assessment assessor would be looking for. He would be looking to see what were the minutes from your management review. If you didn't have minutes, that could show that it was never done, or it was never done appropriately or thoroughly, and therefore it could raise some alarm bells and maybe even a finding. So the next slide, please. So there is external interested parties and internal interested parties. So when you're doing a management review, you need to have a broad idea. You need to look inside. What are the things that's needed inside to get your system at its best? And what are the things that are impacted by your external interested parties? An external interested party, in my case, in your case, would be an accreditation body. What are they wanting to see? For California Elap, what are the regulators wanting to see? Do I have all the standards that I need to do it? Am I performing my PT proficiency testing in appropriately? Things like that. Do I have the records for that? Does the lab have what do you call that? Any special interest groups? Maybe you are performing a sampling. Maybe you collect samples, and those samples come from an external person, external company. You need to make sure those interest groups are taken care of, because when the assessment takes place, those will pop up. And when they pop up, we would need to see records. We need to see communication. We need to see that checklist or other monitoring techniques were used to manage that. So, all right, next slide, please. So this is a root cause analysis and a corrective action. This is called the fish diagram. It's commonly was known as the Ishikawa fishbone diagram. However, over time, people have moved it around and made it look but it generally looks like this. So a category 1 could be equipment. Category 2 could be environment. Category 3 could be quality system. Category 4 could be something else. Now, each one of this will contribute to the final effect. So that's why when we give you a finding, we expect to see a root cause analysis, because if you can manage the cause, then you don't have to worry about the result. You will have a good result every time. So that's what Deming is trying to say. Manage the cause, not the result. Okay, next slide, please. So a management review, one of the key things that a management review does is, from a top-down approach, is to make sure that there is competent personnel. Okay, without a pool of competent personnel who have been trained, monitored, and allowed to be solo, that is the key to the success of a lab, right? You need quality people to do quality things. So then there is the technology, methods, equipment, machinery. Are those giving you the right sensitivity, the right specificity for the type of analytes that you're trying to run? So again, those are very critical, and top management needs to pay attention to that. Okay. The current space and separation requirement, you need to separate probably your microbiology lab from your chemistry lab. That's just a simple example. You can't keep them in the same location, because it may confuse the samples. It may require different environmental conditions. So separation and space is another key item in a lab. Next slide, please. Risk. So risk has become a very big word in conformity assessment, in general, and that is, you have to look at every single method that you do, or every single sector that you work in, and identify risk. In fact, we have a risk plan within our accreditation body that spans a 3-year, and every time, every year, we review the risk plan. It's part of our business plan, but it's also handling our risk management. So you got to do a continuous risk identification. You got to assess the risk, and risk mitigation. That is a very, very important thing. You can never, ever get rid of risk, right? There is always a risk in one way or another in almost everything that we do. But how much can you reduce the risk is what they mean by risk mitigation and contingency measure definition. That is, if a risk turns out to be an issue, what do you do to ensure that you can save the situation, right? So that's a contingency measure. Risk monitoring and control, again, is another area you need to worry about. For example, if you're receiving samples and the sample is coming in from the field, let's say a water source from somewhere, there are some risks that will be coming with that. There will be a risk because some would be requiring a biological test, some will be requiring chemical tests. Now, when it comes in, do you make sure that the biological ones get tested as soon as possible, and the chemical ones can be stored away for a little bit later time? There is a risk to the lab. If you don't do that, then the results may not, reflect the exact condition of the sample. So those are some of the risk monitoring and control you need to do. The next slide, please. Outcomes assurance and the validity of results and management review. Proficiency testing. So there is many ways to do proficiency testing. According to 17025, which is IC 17025, the standard for test labs, you can do inter-laboratory comparison, intra-laboratory reference standards. You could use traceability of reference standards, and all of that. You can use even retained samples where samples are very difficult to get or PT is not available. But participating in organized proficiency testing, that is in proficiency testing providers that are accredited, those would actually give you a lot of traceability. Okay, and that's important. So participation in PT and having that discussed at management review is another important thing. Next slide, please. So these are the outputs at the end: effectiveness of the management system, improvement of the lab activities, and the fulfillment of requirements, V1, M2, the provision of required sources, and if there's any need to make any changes. So these are some of the things you're aiming to get at management review. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, if you always do what you always have done, you're always going to get what you have always got. So Henry Ford said that, so I thought I'd throw that in. So make sure that what you always do is always what you want to get. All right, so work towards what you want to get. All right, thank you. Next one, please. Now, I'm going to talk a few more slides about internal audit, and the reason is internal audit is one of those very key requirements under management review. Internal audit will be looked at very seriously by our assessment team. Okay, when we walk into a lab and if you're doing a quality review, we ask you for your internal audit records. Why? Because if you do the internal audit yourselves, then you have no fear of what the assessment team is going to find, because you already know everything that was wrong and you got it fixed. Okay, so there may be one or two findings, but in general, you would reduce the risk of having a very bad assessment. So make sure you do internal audits and do it properly. All right, next slide, please. So what is an internal audit? Systematic, independent, and documented process for obtaining audit evidence and evaluating it objectively to determine the extent to which audit criteria are fulfilled. The audit criteria is your laboratory processes, your laboratory policies, and your T&I standards. So we will be assessing you against those criteria. Sorry, you would be assessing yourself against those criteria. And when we come, we will make sure that you have done it. Next slide, please. All right, so internal audit items to cover. You have internal audit methods, your planning. You need to do audit reporting, audit finding, writings, and the competency of your internal auditor should be based to ISO 19011. So that's a good standard for those labs when you have when a quality manager is planning the internal audit. Please try to refer to ISO 19011. That is a very good standard. It talks about what everything an audit should be doing and what an auditor should have. So next slide, please. Right. I think every auditor should understand what is a first party, second party, and third party audit. A first party is when you do an internal audit. So I'm a staff of a lab and I lead the internal audit team, or I plan the internal audit. I am doing a first party. If I am, say, performing chemical analysis in my lab for, let's say, a propellant, and so I get Boeing, who I provide my results to. Boeing will come to me and say, hey, we need to do a second party on you to make sure that you are running your lab well. So that's a supplier audit. as an example. So they will come and check how we do our chemical testing of the propellants to make sure that it meets their technical requirements. And of course, an accreditation body like the NGABs, the non-governmental accreditation bodies, or even California ELAP, they are third-party external, and they are independent. Okay, so that's a third party, first, second, third party. So you got to remember that. Next slide, please. So these are the different types of people that could be part of your audit team. Okay, you'll have one lead auditor. Now, one of the things that that we have big labs and we have small labs. So sometimes small labs don't have that many people to form an audit team. So what you do there, you can bring in people and consider them technical experts to go with your lead auditor around the lab to perform certain functions. So as long as you have two people, two auditors within a team, you can very easily satisfy any impartiality requirements. And the other important thing is, when you're doing first party audit, you got to make sure that you are independent of that lab. Let's say, for instance, you are a chemical person, you're handling the chemical section of the lab, but when you do the internal audit of the micro, that's okay, but you shouldn't be doing the chemical lab audit. So you need to be independent of the work that you do. So there's more impartiality. Next slide, please. The audit evidences, those are some of the audit evidences and the criteria. Evidences would be records, communication, emails, statement of facts. Audit criteria would be policies, procedures, those type of things that are being measured against. Next slide, please. Time-based and field-based audits. Okay, time-based is scheduled. So every June, I have an internal audit for my lab. Great. But all of a sudden, I have a complaint. I've got to figure out what went wrong. So I may do a specific internal audit, and that's non-scheduled. It could come, say, in October. What do you call that? I got a complaint, and I immediately call our team and say, hey, we need to check the micro lab because we got a complaint against him. So that's a non-scheduled. Or maybe you want to expand your methodologies. You want to do PFAS. So if you want to do a PFAS, you do a very quick special audit to make sure that you have all the equipment, you have all the competency, personnel, blah, blah, blah. All of that is available, and that will be a non-scheduled audit. A field-based, horizontal and vertical. Now, for some of you that are not familiar, I'll take a vertical audit, say, for instance. So if I want to do a vertical audit, I say I am doing a water test, and that water test, I've got the result. So I take the result, the report, and then I go back to see what was the test done, and then I check on which instrument was the test performed. Are all the calibrations okay on the instrument? And then I go vertically up, who did the test, and if that person did the test, do they have the training records and the competencies? And then I go further and I keep going vertically up. So when you do that, you are checking every single process. Okay, you're picking a piece of that process and you're checking. Now, if there is an error or if there is a doubt, then you have to do an horizontal. So you picked up the instrument and you found that, oh, calibration not done here. Not good. All right. So then you go to another instrument and say, did you do your calibration? Show me your calibration records. You go to another instrument, do a calibration check. Now, if the calibrations are failing, then you will see that along the equipment line. So you got to mix the vertical and horizontal as a means to capture the full picture. Next audit, please. Sorry, next slide. All right. So basically what you're doing, why are you auditing? completeness, efficiency, effectiveness. That's what it's all about. Okay, next slide, please. All right, these are some of the reasons that you would do the auditing. The management helps in preparing business plans, real situation, obligations. If there's any contracts you cannot fulfill, how do you deal with that? What was the reasons? Of course, continual improvement is always there. Reporting directly to top management. So because the audit reports would go up to top management, they would know where the weaknesses are, personnel performance, and then you get a condition and competence of the full infrastructure. Yep, next slide, please. By the way, Leanne, how much time do I have, please? Leanne, how much time do I have, please?
Hi, Mohan. You have a couple more minutes.
Couple more minutes, okay. So assessments by external bodies, these are some of the things that we do. Now remember, the first bullet point is very important. An IAS accreditation assessment of your lab is not an internal audit. You need to do your own internal audit because that's one of the things we check because it's a requirement under the this standard. Next slide, please. Okay, these are some of the planning preparation, and these are some of the process. You've got an opening meeting, you gather the data, you report, you have a closing meeting, and then you follow up. Okay, it's pretty basic. A lot of you know this, but sometimes you have to put it in logical order so you have a better understanding. Next slide, please. Okay, determination of, so before you start the internal audit, you need to ensure that you understand what you're going to audit. So you need to know the scope, what to achieve, what is the criteria, and you need to have, most importantly, the past audit report. You need to make sure that there was closure. Okay, you got to close the loop from the past to start a new one. Then you start your investigation, your determination of the audit team. This is very critical, right? So if you're going to use technical experts, if you're going to have an auditor and lead auditors, you need to be able to mix all of them up so that you can have an appropriate audit team for your appropriate lab. It could be a small lab, it could be a big lab, so you need to decide that, and you have to pay attention to that. Okay, when you contact the auditee, always let them know that time management is important. When you're going to start, when you're going to end, confidentiality is a very important part of being an auditor. The audit team approval. So the laboratory must, the section of the laboratory generally will say, okay, I agree to this team coming in. That is always a good idea because you don't want them to question the audit team. You want them to work with the audit team. And what are the documents available? Next slide, please. All right, so you've got the audit program, you got the scopes, you got the criterias, you got the date audit, time, roles, responsibilities, facilities, and sometimes your lab may be a big lab and you may have a warehouse, you may have security, you may have secretarial support. Those are the type of things that you may have a place where sample is received and sample is sent out. You want to check all of those. So all of those need to be fitted into your program. You got to prepare all of the checklists and then you delegate your task. All right. Next slide, please. All right, I think it must be flexible. That's very important. This slide here, you must be flexible and allowing changes. If you are watching a demonstration of a test, if you're going to do some questioning, you must be flexible, and this must be communicated to the auditee. So so that's very important so that the audit can go well. Next slide, please. Okay, have a memory aid. Have a little checklist that you have made up yourself, and then the important thing is when I do audits or when I do assessments, I try to how you say, I have failed in my early days where I asked more than one question at a time, and the oddity is caught. The oddity is caught between answering the first question and the second question, or the oddity forgets the first question and answers only the second question, and then I forget what are the questions I asked. So it became a little bit of a mess. So you need to ask one question at a time, wait for the answer, and then move to the next one. Open questions are good. How did you do that? So they will describe the process, then you know. A closed question is what do you call, is this instrument calibrated? Yes or no? Yes. How did you do the calibration? So those are type of questions you need to mix around. Next slide, please. The next slide, please. Yep, thank you. Opening meeting, collection of objective evidence, the report, final closing meeting, the follow-up. Okay, may not be first, second party audits, but I recommend that you do the same across the board. Next slide, please. All right. Yes. Cover the subjects in depth, observe the surroundings, compare numbers, beware of strike-throughs and erasures, beware of time period. So if a lab is working on a two shift, and if you're doing the audit on a late shift, you may not be seeing all of the processes that's being done in the early shift. Okay, so manage time. Next slide, please. I'm just going to go very quickly because I don't have much time. These are some of the things. Audit, show me, observe, what, where, when, how, who, all of that is is very important to ask when you're doing an internal audit, because you want to know the 360 of that situation. Okay, next slide. Okay, interviews, observations, records, data analysis, and other evidences. A lot of them use computer LIMS. Those have to be also taken into consideration. You need to understand how those are being managed as well. Storage, what do you call, you don't want any of the files to go corrupt. How do you manage that and all of that? Next slide. Yeah, thanks. All evidence must be documented, very important. Discuss non-conformities, don't just walk away. Agree on a corrective action. You don't have to give them the corrective action, but if they give you a verbal corrective action, you should at least say, all right, why don't you submit that in, and we will consider that. Seems like a potential corrective action. So give them that opportunity to discuss with you. Next slide. Okay, major, minor, these are some of the classifications of the categories. The next slide, please. Okay, always thank the auditees. Scope confirmation, explanation of the method of audit finding, how you're going to go about it, impartiality statement, give a presentation at the end of the findings, give a conclusion announcement, what is the next step, and then the conformity recommendations, and then confirmation of the deadline for the corrective actions. The next step, please. All right, effective application. Okay. All right, this is how you close. The auditor, yes. The next slide, please. All right. So this last three slides, I believe, are quite useful for those who want to be audits. Do not audit the person, but audit the criteria. So, look for mistakes, but seek conformity. You know what I'm saying? Seek for compliance, because your job is to seek for compliance, not to say this lab is bad. It's like, why is it not meeting? Define how the auditee defines. Be prejudiced, be unprejudiced. Do not argue. Okay, I have seen assessors argue with lab analysts and it has got them nowhere. You discuss. You must allow the analyst to say what they have to say, because they are doing the job all the time. You evaluate and then you discover. You don't make judgments before you get all the information. Next slide, please. Okay, again, look at the buts. Question and listen carefully, inform, discover, hear what is not said, look at what is not shown. Okay, that's very important. Look beyond. Encourage, upgrade, investigate, be open-minded, and be smart. Remember, you're there to add value. So therefore, you need to do all of these. So an auditor needs to be open-minded, diplomatic, observative, persistent, and as you can see from the slides, okay, and impartial. All right, next slide. Okay, this is a 19011 standard which describes all of this in full. So please take a look at that standard if you're going to be an auditor for your laboratory. Next slide. Show me all of that. Next slide, please. And that brings us to the end. I thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'm very, very happy to answer. If there is not enough time, you can always write to me. I will. I can share my email, and you can send it off to us. It's iasinfo at iasonline.org, and go ahead and send it to me. I'll help you out. All right. Thank you, Leanne. Appreciate.
Well, thank you, Mohan, for your informative presentation. Yes.
Yeah,
we
thank
do
you,
have
Lou.
one question. Yeah,
Please.
we do have one question for you, though. Is the on-site assessment equal to the internal audit?
Okay, so the on-site assessment by an accreditation body is actually going to make sure that you have completed your internal audit, because internal audit is one of the requirements under Volume 1, Module 2. So if you hadn't done your internal audit, then means that you did not complete one of the requirements. And an accreditation body is there to ensure that the internal audit was completed, or was it not completed. That is our job. So it does not, an IAS assessment does not replace an internal audit.
Okay, I think we're good. Thank you again, Mohan. Let's move on.
Thank you,
We are still having. We just want to acknowledge that we are still having technical difficulties with Teams Live. So if you do encounter any network issues, please log off and log back into the conference. We do understand that this is a little bit frustrating on your side, but again, we do appreciate your patience and persistence for joining us in this presentation. Okay, but also note that day 1 and day 2 of this conference will be uploaded to our YouTube page, a link that was provided in the emails that was sent out. You can also go on YouTube itself and search for Elap Conference 2025 to locate the videos, and also our California Elap YouTube page, where we post all of our previous conferences as well. Again, thank you again for your patience. So our next session focuses on turning findings into improvements, because identifying an issue is just the beginning. What truly matters is how we respond. In any lab bootcamp, mistakes are learning opportunities. With boots on the ground experience, what do our third-party assessors think makes a corrective action truly effective? Zaneta Popovska with ANAB will walk us through how to build plans that not only fix issues, but prevent them from recurring. Zaneta serves as an associate director at the ANSI National Accreditation Board, ANAB, where she leads the ILR, Inspection, Laboratory, and Related Activities team. With over 14 years of experience at ANAB within the ILR team, an additional 13 years of prior professional background in engineering, medical research, and technical roles across various testing laboratories, Zaneta brings a wealth of expertise to her role. Zaneta brings insight into what makes a corrective action plan not just compliant, but impactful. Her expertise helps laboratories move beyond box checking and towards meaningful, lasting improvements. Please join me in welcoming Zaneta to the stage.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Nak, for that good introduction. As Nak mentioned, today we're going to talk about the writing effective corrective action plans. Next slide, please. First, I would like to tell you who we are and what we do. Who is ANAB? We are the American National Standard Institute, NC, National Accreditation Board. We are a nonprofit, non-governmental organization that provides accreditation and training services to public and private sector organizations, including management system, laboratories, including forensic service providers, inspection bodies, reference material producers, proficiency test providers, and product certifiers. Next slide, please. We are wholly owned subsidiary to NC, National Accreditation Board, with the headquarters in Washington, D.C. and office in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Next slide, please. As you can see, our satellite office is in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and headquarters in D.C. Next slide, please. The NC National Accreditation Board, ANAB, we are the largest multidisciplinary accreditation body in the Western Hemisphere, with more than 3,000 organizations accredited in approximately 80 countries. We are one of the 4 approved third-party assessment agencies by the State Water Board to provide services to the laboratories applying for California Elap accreditation. As you can see on this slide, the screenshot from our website, all the laboratories who wanted to have the accreditation assessment by ANAB for the California ELAB program, they can go on our website and on the nec.anab.org link. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk about writing effective corrective action plans. First, I'm going to go to the introduction to the corrective action plans. We're going to go over understanding of the cost analysis, developing of a corrective action plan, recognizing ineffective corrective actions, and at the end, follow-up and monitoring. Next slide, please. If the cause of the nonconformity is not effectively determined, suitable corrective actions cannot be identified. Corrective actions need to address the causes of the nonconformity in order to correct the problem and prevent the reoccurrence. Corrective actions need to be appropriate to the effect of the nonconformities encountered. Effectiveness of the actions taken must be reviewed as well. If the effectiveness of the action taken is not evaluated, it cannot be determined that the cause was eliminated and the problem was corrected. Next slide, please. So cost analysis. Cost analysis can be a useful tool for both correcting nonconformities of the problem after they occur. This is the reactive process, but also preventing nonconformities of problems from occurring as well. That's the proactive process. Risk-based thinking is one tool that can assist in being proactive with nonconformities or problems before they occur. Preventive actions address the future, not the past. Next slide, please. Effective cost analysis. This is the key to determining corrective actions that can yield long-lasting results. Both ISO 9001 and ISO 17025 standards moved away from the term root cause analysis, and now they address the cost analysis. It is recognized that nonconformities rarely have one distinct cause, and limiting the analysis to one cause could limit the effectiveness of correction and corrective actions. Effective cost analysis is the key to determining actions that yield long-lasting results. Correction, corrective action, and preventive action need to address the cause of the causes, not the symptoms of the nonconformity. Next slide, please. To have a good cost analysis, we really need to start to review and analyze the nonconformity. We need to know what is the problem, when did it happen, where did it happen, and why did it happen. This is the beginning of the cost analysis. Next slide, please. Purpose of the cost analysis. As I mentioned on my previous slide, the first step of any corrective action process is the cost analysis. Output of the cost analysis process is the input to the corrective actions. The outcomes of the corrective action process is input on elimination of the underlying cause or reason for the problem. Failure to adequately identify and evaluate the fundamental cause or reason for a nonconformity leads to reoccurrence. Next slide, please. So I have a couple definitions from ISO 9000. You can see from this slide difference between correction and corrective action. Correction is the action to eliminate a detected nonconformity. Corrective action is the action to eliminate the cause of a detected nonconformity or other undesirable situation. Corrective action should prevent the problem from happening again and result in improvement in the process. Next slide, please. So I have here correction versus corrective action. As you can see, correction really treats the symptoms and its immediate fix. Corrective action treats the cause. That's the permanent fix. Next slide, please. Correction tells us what actions can be taken to control and correct the nonconformity. Next slide, please. Corrective action, for each cause identified, discuss corrective actions to eliminate the cause of the nonconformity. This will consider changes to the management system, personnel needs, and other resources needed. Next slide, please. There are 4 steps of the cost analysis. Those 4 steps are very important. The first step that to begin the cost analysis, it really defines the problem. We really need to define what the problem is. The second step is data collection and analysis. We need to start collecting the data and start with the analysis. Number 3, selection and implementation of the corrective actions. And of course, at the end, monitoring of the corrective actions. Next slide, please. These are the examples of the poor cost analysis. The human error, unfamiliar with the requirement, didn't follow the procedure, lack of training. These are all symptoms of larger causes that need to be investigated further. Next slide, please. After we identify the steps of the cost analysis, then we can develop corrective action plan. We should list all solutions that will prevent the problem from reoccurring. There are benefits of listing all solutions and identifying multiple solutions. For example, if resources are limited, we can implement those solutions that are feasible at the time. We will have a record of solutions identified and why or why not implemented. We will provide upper management in the organization with the information necessary to make an informed decision. Next slide, please. And really, corrective action plan should include: what are the corrective actions to be implemented? What are the resources and activities required? What are the responsible parties? What is the sequence of implementation as needed? And what is the target implementation date? And also, what are the follow-up and monitoring activities planned? So all these steps, they should be listed on the good corrective action plan. So the laboratory will have a very good and effective corrective action plan. Next slide, please. Ineffective corrective actions. These are all the examples of ineffective corrective actions. While these actions most likely will need to be taken as part of the entire process, in and of themselves, they will not eliminate the cause of the nonconformity. Reminding personnel, performing retraining, distributing a memo, controlled forms, they're all corrections that can be taken. But robust corrective action targeted at the cause of nonconformity will ensure it does not reoccur. Next slide, please. And when to follow up and monitor. Think of the timing of implementation and how long the process must run before being able to determine if the actions were effective in eliminating the cause. It can be done several weeks or months. It can be planned with the planned additional audit. It can be done during our next audit, internal audit, or our next management review. All these steps mentioned will help us to create a good and effective corrective action plan. Next slide, please. And thank you. If you have any questions, you can send email to me, zpopovsky@enab.org. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a great presentation on CAPS. Thank you, Zanetta. We do have a question for you. Could you please define nonconformity?
What is a nonconformity? Define. There's a statement that when the laboratory is not complying with certain section from the standard that they've been assessed. Does that answer the question? Usually the nonconformities are written, our assessors are writing section from the standard, and if laboratory, in this particular case with California Elap program, if laboratory is not compliant, then yes, we gonna write as a non-compliant.
I believe that covers it. Thank you, Zanetta.
Thank you.
So now it's time to go behind the scenes. Every day, Elap receives hundreds of inquiries, some urgent, some unusual, and all insightful. Let's open a window into a place many of you have probably visited, maybe even today. That's right, we're talking about the Elap email inbox. Elap's inboxes receive questions, concerns, documents, and everything in between. But what really goes on behind the scenes? What are the most common themes? Here to take us inside the Elap email inbox are 3 members of Elap who have a part in managing it, all with insight, expertise, and patience. Please welcome Caitlin McCarthy, Leanne Castle, and Naeem Ahmad, who are part of a team dedicated to keeping communication flowing and ensuring your questions get answers. If you joined in yesterday, then please help me welcome Caitlin back to the Elap conference stage as the supervisor of the administrative operations unit. Joining her on stage is Leanne, who has worked in Elap's program development, research, and enforcement unit since 2021. Rounding out the team is Naeem, who also works in the program development, research, and enforcement unit and has over 10 years of experience as an environmental scientist. Let's give Caitlin, Leanne, and Naeem a warm welcome.
Good morning. I think I'm up first. Is that right? We can move to the next slide, please. Well, these are all of our beautiful faces. Yep, and they're, oh, too fast.
Wait.
Here we go.
Wait. Yep. All good.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you. Morning, everybody. Nice to be back again today, and I'm happy to be able to give you a little peek behind the curtain of what happens. I think Nak mentioned that we do get a lot of emails. Luckily, we don't get hundreds a day, but we do get hundreds per month. And I wanted to start with a snapshot of what it looks like to staff our general email inbox. And so this is the email address, elapca@waterboards.ca.gov. So this task is shared by Ruby and Kim, who you met yesterday, and overseen by me. It is no small feat. The numbers in this table that you're seeing represent the number of email inquiries we received during the year of 2024. However, these numbers do not include applications. So this is everything outside of that. It represents the customer service function that we fill. It works out to be an average of 180 inquiries per month, which is 8 to 9 per day. Some of them are fairly quick to answer and some of them take much longer. So it is a significant lift for us. And now I want to take you through a few of the most common types of inquiries that we receive. You can go to the next slide. Great. Thank you. This is probably not surprising, but one of the most common emails we get is help. I need assistance with my application. When you reach out, we will point you to our available resources like our planning tool and our regulations text. But we also take time to research your laboratory's current circumstances to be sure we're providing the best advice possible for you. Despite how hard we have tried for many, many years to make questions fit neatly into certain boxes so that we can efficiently answer them using standard responses, that has mostly been a failed effort. And that's just because each situation truly is unique. Your laboratory has a lot of moving pieces, and there are many, many different elements in laboratory accreditation. So we do take the time to research where you're at, what's going on with you, so that we can guide you best. We do love when you ask questions ahead of time because it often saves time on the back end and stress on the back end for you and for us. But to help us help you, please be sure to use the tools available to you before reaching out. Fill out the guidance tool, review the regulatory requirements, check out our YouTube page, ask your friends or other laboratories if you have a question. And then when you send us an email, please include as much context and detail as possible. This includes obviously your certificate number and laboratory name, but the other information that you can provide us really helps us get back to you sooner and be more specific in our answers. Our goal is to respond to you as quickly as possible, but definitely within 2 business days. So if you've hit that 2 business day mark and you haven't heard back from us, please feel free to poke us or to reach back out. It may just be that your question is really complicated and it's taking us a bit more time to get an answer together for you. Next slide. Another very common inquiry that we get is that folks who are looking for a laboratory. So in addition to helping our lab stakeholders, we also regularly provide assistance to the general public and to other regulators. This can include providing instructions on using our GIS map of laboratories that's on our webpage to help a homeowner get testing done on their tap water, to creating custom lists for regulators who need laboratories that are accredited for specific FOAs. We also consistently play the role of bridging members of the public with their local drinking water offices and drinking water engineers who are equipped to answer specific water quality questions for local stakeholders. This is an incredibly important service that we provide to the public, and we are really proud to do that. Next slide. Accreditation inquiries are another common email that we get to our inbox. So if you do not know what an accreditation inquiry is, it is the process by which you request review of an application decision made by Elap. So for example, you received your updated certificate and fields of accreditation from Elap, but you were denied for an FOA, and the non-compliance code cited for the denial states that you did not submit a PT result. But you swear that you performed that PT and that you submitted it with your application. In this situation, you would fill out an accreditation inquiry form and submit it by email within 30 days of receiving your certificate because you believe Elap made an error in the evaluation of your application. When we receive an AI, that's what we call them for short, AIs, our admin team does a preliminary but deep dive into the application to investigate. Then the accreditation inquiry moves on to a technical review if needed. A response is drafted and reviewed by management. And finally, Elap's quality assurance officer reviews to determine if corrective or preventative action is needed on our behalf. Some important things to note about accreditation inquiries. Number 1, they must be submitted within 30 days of receiving your certificate. This is why it's so important to review your accreditation documents when you receive them. You don't want to be in a situation where you realize as you are applying for renewal that your last certificate that you got 2 years ago did not include everything that you thought it did. Number 2, you can't submit new documents or information in an AI. So if you did perform that PT, but you forgot to submit it, you need to submit an amendment application to correct your error. And number 3, Elap's going to respond to your inquiry within 30 days. If we indeed make an error, the FOA in question would be restored to your certificate with the same start date. However, if the error was yours and not ours, you'll be 30 days later and still out of luck. Next question. We also get a fair amount of fee and accounting questions. So some laboratories do reach out and need help determining the appropriate fee for their application. We are happy to help with that. But we also work very closely with our partners here at the Water Board's Division of Administrative Services to make sure you all receive the application and payment reminder notices that you love so much and depend on to trigger, your payment, and that the checks that you send get credited to the right account. This may seem like a small task, but it's not. We spend quite a bit of time calling laboratories and agencies to determine who checks belong to. You can help us by making sure that your check includes the invoice number written on the face of the check or including proof of payment with your application. We will hold on to your certificate until payment is confirmed. So this is a small but important thing to remember. Next slide, please. And the final thing I wanted to mention about our role in ELAP CA is that we play the switchboard, so to speak, ensuring that every email gets where it needs to go. So as the general inbox, we tend to be the first point of contact, and that's fine. We make sure your requests for change in technical manager make it to the staff who will evaluate them, that your MUR question makes it to Chris or our accreditation officer, and that your PT questions get to the monitoring unit. This is a critical role in the ELAP communication machine. And that does it for me.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Naim Ahmad. I'm an environmental scientist in the Program Research, Development, and Enforcement Unit. And one of my tasks is to respond to the PT inbox. Today, I'm going to provide a peek into the kind of issues that laboratories encounter and how ELAP addresses them. I'll focus on 3 common PT related questions and provide guidance. On the screen, you will see an example of the type of questions that ELAP receives. This question is one of the most common and urgent PT test questions that we receive. Typically, it's help. We failed our PTs. What are our next steps? Next slide, please. ELAP regulations requires laboratories to perform several different steps after failing a PT. The first step is to conduct a thorough investigation to determine the root cause of the failure. The laboratory must document its findings. The laboratory is required to implement corrective action. The laboratory is required to perform a corrective action PT. The corrective action PT must be from a different lot or PT provider. Repeating the same PT sample is not allowed. Next slide, please. Another common question that we receive is the laboratory analyzed the wrong PT, specifically the wrong matrix, analyte, or method. Doesn't match the laboratory's accreditation scope, and they're wondering what they should do next and if the results are valid. For a PT to count towards your annual requirement, the matrix, analyte, and method must match exactly what's listed on your field of accreditation. If it doesn't match, even if it's close, the PT result is not valid for compliance purposes and does not satisfy the annual PT requirement. It's important to double check the PTs before you order them with your current FOA list to ensure that the correct PTs are being ordered. Next slide, please. A unusually common question that we receive is the PT samples were sent to another location. Perhaps the laboratory has headquarters at another location or different laboratory locations. The laboratory should ensure that the mailing address is correct and the laboratory performing the testing is the location receiving the samples. If samples are sent to another location, it's critical to notify Elap and the PT provider. The laboratory should also keep a strict chain of custody and a sample integrity policy. Next slide, please. In summary, these emails reflect real challenges laboratories face with proficiency testing. Remember, when you fill a PT test, to investigate and document the field PT, perform a timely corrective action, always analyze PT samples matching your field of accreditation list, maintain a strict chain of custody and sample integrity policy. As we move forward, remember PT compliance is more than checking boxes. Use failures and mistakes as catalysts for improvement. Document everything, and not just to meet the regulations, but to build a strong culture of accountability. And when in doubt, reach out. For PT questions, reach out to elapca_pt@waterboards.ca.gov. With that, I'll turn the stage over to Leanne.
Thank you, Naeem and Kate. And again, welcome everyone to the 2025 ELAP conference. Today, I'm taking you behind the scenes into ELAP's technical inbox to share some of the most common and important questions that we get from California laboratories. As Kate and Naeem mentioned, we're not just here to give you regulatory answers. We want to use these scenarios to encourage labs to take ownership of their systems and treat every opportunity as a learning opportunity, with the idea that we all commit to continual improvement. As mentioned before, contacting the ELAP email inboxes is the most direct way to ask questions and receive answers regarding all things environmental laboratory accreditation as it relates to California. In my segment, we'll shift our focus to some of the technical questions that we regularly receive. Again, these come from the technical inbox and often involve interpreting regulatory requirements or clarifying procedures. The technical inbox is where science and quality often meet. The technical inbox receives over 100 emails monthly, not nearly as much as the ELAP general inbox. And approximately 60% of the emails received to the technical inbox relate to some form of a change within a laboratory. Things like retirements, promotions, new hires, or laboratories restructuring their roles. And because we receive so many notifications about these changes, it's clear that it's a continual topic for laboratories throughout California. So looking at some of the questions that often come up when labs go through these changes, whether it is someone retiring or a new manager stepping into a new role, laboratories will submit emails to the technical inbox with a notification of personnel change. Oftentimes, they ask, who do we notify when someone retires? What forms do we need to submit? And they're all great questions. They show that our laboratories are thinking proactively about what it takes to maintain compliance during periods of change. So, if roles change in your laboratory, ensure the new staff member is trained before they perform testing. Update your quality manual, SOPs, and organizational structure to reflect new personnel. And if the change involves key technical staff, such as a change in technical manager, submit the proper notifications to ELAP along with all required documentation. Lastly, keep all training records organized and accessible for assessment preparedness. If key roles change, such as when there is a change of technical manager and/or quality manager, the laboratory shall within 30 days submit notification to ELAP. Remember, laboratories that do this well are not just checking boxes. They're building documented quality systems. Training records, SOPs, and organization charts of laboratories excelling at documentation reflect these changes and include new hires in new positions. Additionally, personnel that perform accredited testing are qualified through their education, training, and experience, and their competency is documented before they begin work on regulated samples. This is duly critical as it also reinforces the importance of having a documented quality system. So consider the qualifications of your new hire and include copies of applicable degrees and/or laboratory analyst, water quality analyst certificates. Additionally, remember that any international degrees require a certificate of equivalency, and these documents should be submitted along with the change in technical manager form. We also received numerous inquiries related to interpretation and clarification. One of the topics that consistently shows up in the technical inbox is initial instrument calibration. Every month we receive emails from laboratories asking some version of a similar question. How many standards are needed? How many points if the instrument response is linear? These questions are all variations on a theme of how do we calibrate and how often. Here we'll help clarify what's expected under California's regulatory framework and the standards. To start, receiving variations of this question shows that labs want to get it right the first time. While these questions might seem simple, the answer depends on regulations and method-specific requirements. So, when you're planning your initial calibration procedures, please refer to the standards. The number necessary will vary depending on the type of curve being utilized, and in some cases, it can be defined as a minimum of 5, but not all are the same. Again, please pay attention to the language as written in the regulations. Consulting both the method and the standards are critical. Remember, just because you're using a method doesn't mean you're automatically compliant. Documentation and justification are key. And as Kate and Naeem mentioned, we aren't just checking boxes. It's part of our laboratory's integrity. And as always, make sure to maintain records of your calibration as part of your laboratory's quality systems. Shifting on to another topic we also see in the inbox is notifications when there's a positive result. These results are time sensitive and critical for public health. Sometimes we receive questions such as, is email communication enough? Do I have to make a phone call? Who should be contacted? Is there a central inbox? And what should we say? Timely notification is critical because a water system has time-sensitive steps they must conduct upon receiving news of positive samples. ELAP has compliance advisories that can be referred to in regards to reporting requirements, as both laboratories and water systems have similar notification regulations. Laboratories make notifications via phone calls, as other methods such as email, text message, and fax may go unnoticed, especially on weekends. If a laboratory chooses to utilize communication other than a phone call, it needs to ensure the notification reaches the designated contact person by requiring some sort of response indicating when the notification was received. When you notify, be clear and complete. The clearer the information, the faster the response. Another question we receive has to do with FOAs. Just because a method exists and is published or even works well in your lab doesn't mean it's approved for use in your regulatory program. California ELAP offers accreditation for analytical methods that have been approved by a California state regulatory agency for use in regulatory reporting. That means it's not just enough for a method to be scientifically valid, it must also be legally valid within the context of your matrix, analyte, and method combination. So what can you do for your lab? Start with your FOA tables. Start with the ELAP FOA tables. These tables are your roadmap. They list what ELAP offers accreditation for down to the analyte, method, and matrix. And if something's not listed, maybe there's a reason. Reference federal and state approval sources and don't assume that anything that is in quote commonly used means that it is regulatorily acceptable. Take the time to verify your methods that they're officially approved for the purpose you're using them for. Ask before you act. If you're not sure, email ELAP or contact your PT provider. And with that, I want to thank you for your time in diving into the various ELAP inboxes. And I will turn it back over to you, Nok. Thank you.
Thank you for giving us a glimpse into the ELAP inboxes, Caitlin, Leanne, and Naeem. Well, you've made it through the morning's first drill. Nice work, team. Before we move on to the next sessions, it's time for a quick 5-minute breather. Think of it as a water break at base camp. Stretch out, regroup, and refuel. Be back here in formation in 5 because the next mission kicks off soon. Let's stay sharp. All right, recruits, break time is over. Fall back in and take your seats. It's time to gear up for the next operation in today's lineup. This next presentation drills into what happens when the rules meet real-world implementation. Compliance is about accountability, and understanding the enforcement perspective is mission critical. Leading this tactical briefing is Michael Head, Senior Environmental Scientist, Supervisor with ELAP, and Supervisor of the Program Development, Research, and Enforcement Unit. Excuse me, guys. Michael worked for over 20 years in environmental, pharmaceutical, and biotechnology laboratories prior to joining the state in 2019. Michael will walk us through what it looks like when regulation and reality meet and what labs can do to stay mission ready. Please welcome Michael Head to the stage.
All right, thank you, Nak. I appreciate that. Hope everybody is enjoying day 2 of Elap Con. So today, you're going to hear some similar themes to what you've already heard today and on day 1, but with a focus on enforcement. Slide. So we'll cover today these four topics. I'll give a brief overview of enforcement. We'll talk about the referrals that we saw in 2024 and kind of the trends we see there. We'll talk about what we saw on the field in the labs with boots on the ground, and then I'll close with some guidance for laboratories. And that guidance will sound very familiar with what other people have said. All right, next. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about our team and about our work. And first, we'll talk about the ELAP enforcement mission. Next slide. So ultimately, our mission is similar to our primary mission above us, which is the protection of the environment and public health. But we do that in ELAP enforcement by ensuring laboratory compliance. You know, the regulators need data that they can rely on to make decisions. And so we take our mission seriously and go out there and check that labs are in compliance. We use progressive enforcement as the way that we do that. And ultimately, one of the goals coming out of that is to create a level playing field for the lab community. And so by doing that, you know, by holding bad actors to account, we eliminate the competitive advantage of those that don't follow the rules. And that also creates some deterrence for those that are considering those pathways. So that's a little bit about the mission. Next slide. And so I'm going to talk about a little bit about the history. So before 2014, ELAP was within the California Department of Public Health. And there are some issues then, and among them were enforcement's failure to investigate actionable cases. And that inaction was part of the decision to move ELAP where we are now under the Division of Drinking Water at the Water Board. And back then, ELAP was considered a paper tiger. Next. And so we move on to after 2014 until now. Kind of saw there's a shift towards being more reactive and with a focus on drinking water. You know, we're no longer considered a paper tiger, and one of the reasons that we are effective now is that we have the assistance of attorneys within the Office of Enforcement, and we utilize their help extensively to go down these administrative, civil, and criminal pathways. Right within enforcement, there are 4 staff. So I'm the supervisor. There are 4 staff, and you'll notice that you know, our unit is called the Program Development, Research, and Enforcement Unit. So the 4 staff that work in the group that do enforcement cases wear a lot of hats, and because of that, and we are, you know, we're a diverse team and we're effective because of all the things we see. But you know, that keeps us pretty busy, and which is good because our work has steadily gone up. And so we'll see those numbers in a second. So next slide. So moving on to kind of an overview of 2024. So all the referrals that come into ELAP start with, it starts with a tip. It starts with a referral, generally an email. But next slide. So who submits them? So here are, here's a list of where we get our referrals from. So the primary place we get referrals are internal. So we get them from our other program units within ELAP, and we get a lot from the Division of Drinking Water as well. We also receive quite a few referrals from clients of laboratories and the general public. Those top four really are the majority of the referrals that we receive, but we also do get referrals from labs. So we do get some self-referrals, and we do get referrals from labs about other labs as well. And rounding that out, we do get referrals from state agencies, other state agencies, and I think we got 2 anonymous referrals last year. Next slide. And so here's over time since 2014 what the referral level looks like on our team. It does coincide. There's an increase that coincides with onboarding of TNI, and also an increase, once we're holding labs to account on meeting TNI. The bar in orange on there, the bar in orange is kind of, it's just a projection from what we've currently seen in 2025. But definitely the trend is up. We expect that trend to kind of plateau and eventually decrease once labs get settled in. All right, next slide. All right, here are the categories. So of the referrals that we got in 2024. In 2024, 1 in 5 were a referral for a deficiency with TNI. So that was our biggest category. And the next category down was accreditation, missed reporting, and then issues with technical manager. And so those top 4 comprise about 2/3 of all the referrals that we saw. Now note that these are the numbers, right? And these are the numbers of referrals or allegations. And so that doesn't take into account like what we did on the back end of that. And it's not related to the severity or impact, but that's what we see at the numbers of referrals. So those top 4 we're going to dig into a little bit more when we talk about boots on the ground, which is next. All right. Next slide, please. So what did we see in 2024? Part of that was, like I said, was TNI. And so this is the biggest thing that we saw when we went into lab. So were issues with document control. So we saw SOPs in draft form that were being used as the effective document. We saw obsolete SOPs that were still being used. SOP versioning, so there would be 2 different versions of the same SOP being utilized within labs. And then I think the most common one probably was uncontrolled documents within laboratories. So this is checklists, aids, instructions that are posted as a reference, like on the wall. And those are required to be controlled through TNI. And that's something that, if that is something that is in your lab, just take a look at that. They're not allowed. I mean, you can have them, they just need to be controlled. So that's and a little bit more in TNI. Next slide. The next big category is traceability. So traceability of records is crucial to laboratories. It's the primary way to demonstrate data integrity, and so it is a big focus when we go into laboratories. Is the control of records. So we did see issues with chain of custodies either not being clear or not being complete. There are labs that have multiple locations, and it's not always clear what location is the one doing the testing. And so we've seen a little bit of that. And then also with equipment, reagent logbooks in the lab, basically, either not being present or not being utilized, not being paginated, like those kind of things. But the traceability is something that's really important. Next. All right, the next big block was accreditation. So we received many referrals about labs not being accredited for the test method matrix for samples that they were reporting for regulatory samples. And that's a pretty serious thing and actionable. And then the second thing we see on the accreditation side is a PT failure for the second time. And so, you know, the regulations are really specific. So 9 went into this a little bit, but for second failures, laboratories need to suspend for that FOA, no longer report regulatory for that. So we did see some of those last year. Next slide. The next big slice of the pie there is missed and late reporting. Now this is drinking water testing. So these are issues with in the same bucket. So we do missed and late reporting, but in the same bucket it also includes failure to notify within 24 hours for micro. We did have issues with laboratories recalling results that were reported to CLIP, are trying to change sample designation, which is not allowed. Next. All right, and the last big bucket were issues with technical managers. So two primary things, and they're both notifications. So you know, if a technical manager is absent for 15 days, you need to designate an interim. And then if they're absent for greater than 35 days, you need to notify ELAP of that. And then the temporary technical manager needs to also, of course, qualify, you know, meet the qualifications of the technical manager. And then we also saw just a change in technical manager and a failure to notify ELAP about that. Yes, so that's the 4 high-level things that we saw boots on the ground in 2024. So going into guidance for labs. So some habits that we want to share for labs in good. I put labs in good standing here, but you know, labs that are functioning really well, like in person when we got into labs, and these are some of the things that we saw when we were out there. So next page. So mistakes happen, right? So next slide. And I like this quote by Oscar Wilde, you know, experience is simply the name we give to our mistakes. You know, I worked in a laboratory for a long time. We worked in lots of labs, and I was an experienced analyst, meaning I made a lot of mistakes. And I'll give a few examples. You know, not tearing a balance when weighing out a standard, adding the wrong reagent to the sample prep, misloading vials in a carousel, like those kind of mistakes. So those things happen. And then, so this Oscar Wilde quote I really like, but I like the next one even more, from Nikki Giovanni, who's was an American poet. Mistakes are a fact of life. It is the response to error that counts. And this really goes into what other people have said already. You know, Maria's talk on feathering your cap, and Cheyenne's talk on readiness, and the ones earlier today. It really is how you approach mistakes that's important. Slide. So yeah, so how you address so having a robust corrective and preventive action processes, having those really well defined is great. And the previous one of the previous ones talked about digging deeper for root cause, right? Is Zenetta's presentation, and I would encourage labs to do that. You know, an example here is like using the wrong pipette to make a dilution, right? You know, normally what we often see in labs is like they stop at analyst error, they retrain the analyst and move on. And really, I would encourage labs to dig a little bit deeper. And so going back to the examples I gave when we were had Oscar Wilde up on the screen, not tearing a balance, right? These really were the outcomes of these mistakes. They didn't stop at analyst error. So not tearing a balance, we determined that the process just needed to be refined a little bit. And what we did, and this is in the pharma lab, so what we did was printed out the tear of the balance before, and you would include the printout like in your logbook. So adding the wrong reagent to sample prep, we determined that that the pipettes being used to make the dilutions were all done in the same spot all the time, but pipettes were mixed up. Like there were multiple different sizes of pipettes, so we changed it so stations were, you know, the 100 ml dilution area is here, the 50 ml is here, in a different spot, and that really did eliminate that problem. Misloading the vials in a carousel, we included a process step to do a second check before starting. So again, I encourage labs to dig a little deeper for underlying root cause. Next slide. And this one, it's good to say, but it's hard to do. So creating a culture of continuous improvement, creating and maintaining it. So our keynote speaker, Master Sergeant Tibbetts, talked about this a little bit, about like if you don't shape culture, people are going to bring their own. And so be really active in creating and maintaining the continuous improvement mindset and getting feedback from your staff, really kind of openly discussing things, creating visibility, and really focus on process and not people. You know, like it's not the person's fault, it's the fault of the process or the way the setup. And also in my experience in laboratories, recognizing contributions, recognizing those ideas is really important to get that engagement. Next. All right, and the final habit I wanted to cover was communicating with Elap. So they talked about this a little bit in the previous presentation, but if you have general questions or application process questions, you can reach out to the general inbox, Elap CA box. PTs have its own inbox. If you have method or lab procedure issues, you can send them to technical. And then enforcement referrals, you can also send those to technical, or you can email me directly. And with that, I will close and make up some time to get us back on track. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Mike, for providing that presentation on enforcement in relation to TNI compliance. We do have a question for you. Does the ELAP enforcement unit work with regional or state water board program enforcement officers and/or agency partners as it relates to sample collection, transport, and analysis for enforcement-related items? If so, can you elaborate on that?
Okay, so that's a long question. Let's see. We definitely work with other regional and state water board program and agency partners. Yes, we do. I don't know exactly what is meant by as it relates to sample collection, transport, and analysis of enforcement related items, but we part of our toolbox does include the ability to have a laboratory perform a proficiency test when necessary. So we can do that. So in tandem with the division, our other agencies, we can do that. Now, ELAP is not, unless it's by a laboratory personnel, ELAP is not does not regulate sample collection. So that's a little bit tricky, but the analysis side, certainly, that would be part of it. So short answer, yes, we do work with within the water board and other agencies.
I believe we have one more question. How are Excel workbooks expected to be document controlled? Can the full workbook be document controlled as one document?
Well, that's a good question. So there are a bunch of different ways to do things, and it ultimately relies on what you're using it for. So, if this Excel is the means to generate a record, right? So say you have an Excel document that you enter in results or whatever, and then you print it out, and that's like your formal record. That template that you're entering it into can be controlled. Yeah, so you can, put that in your document control system. The record itself is different. That then becomes a record. If it's just to track your work, if it's something you use to just as a tracker, those don't necessarily need to be controlled. I hope that answers your question. If it's a process document, it needs to be controlled.
One last question, Michael. What is your favorite board game?
Ooh, nice. Yeah, so some of you may have seen the games behind me. Right now, I think my favorite board game is a game called Arc Nova, which is about building the best zoo. And it's right here. It's right there. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you again, Michael. All right, team, it's time for the next presentation in today's lineup. And this one's all about staying on target. Like a compass in the field, they guide us through variation and performance monitoring. When you're navigating the complex world of testing, consistency is your best ally. That's where control charts come in. They're not just data plots. They're precision tools to help you monitor, adapt, and stay mission ready. Here to lead this specialized drill is Katie Payne from Nautilus Environmental, an expert in wet testing and quality control strategies. Katie has nearly 2 decades of experience in ecotoxicity testing at Nautilus Environmental in San Diego, California. She has a passion for applying toxicology, biology, and ecology to understand, navigate, and solve complex environmental issues. Her session will equip you with practical tools and insights to tighten up your operations and stay on point. Let's give a strong boot camp welcome to Katie Payne, who will help us master this essential tool.
Thanks so much, Nock. I'm so pleased to be participating today. I'm Katie Payne. I'm the Toxicity Program Development Manager for Nautilus Environmental. I've been working in a toxicity lab for nearly 2 decades, and I've had roles ranging from bench testing to operations management to quality assurance and client services. So I've seen this stuff from a lot of different angles. In my presentation today, I'm going to cover a little bit about Nautilus, some of the very basics of whole effluent toxicity testing for anyone who's not familiar, an introduction to reference toxicant tests, talk about how we use control charts for whole effluent toxicity testing, and then I'll provide a few visual examples that we can work through together. Nautilus Environmental is a commercial toxicity lab. We're located in San Diego, California. We've been in continuous operation for more than 20 years. We have previously been part of a different laboratory network, but we just recently joined the IEH Laboratory and Consulting family of labs. And we pride ourselves on being responsive, applied scientists focused on all aspects of toxicity testing, which can be a little niche and specialized. And so we often find ourselves as a neutral resource to various clients, partners, partners, regulators, and other data users. And our lab accreditations include California ELAP. We are TNI accredited through the Oregon Environmental Lab Accreditation Program, and also Washington Department of Ecology and Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. I always say that we're a different kind of lab because most folks who aren't familiar with toxicity testing picture a traditional analytical chemistry lab with rows and rows of instruments. And in the toxicity world, it's all about the organisms. And so I like to start with a virtual tour of sorts so you can understand how the lab works. Starting at the bottom right, you can see one of our animal holding areas with water on a flow-through system. It kind of looks like a Petco. If yours has an aquarium section. On the top right, you can see part of our sample receiving area. So samples usually come to us in polycubitainers. We check them in, measure basic water quality parameters like DO, pH, salinity, conductivity, chlorine. And the center top is our microscope area. A lot of toxicity tests require our analysts to manually count, transfer, or evaluate very small critters in some capacity. Center bottom, you can see one of our temperature-controlled environmental chambers where the testing is actually performed. Toxicity testing requires very precise variable control, so temperatures are maintained typically within plus or minus 1 degree. And then on the left, you can kind of see a bird's eye view of our main laboratory area and also one of our sample cold storage areas. So whole effluent toxicity testing, or WET, which is different than wet chemistry for my chemists in the audience. It's typically included in NPDES permits. It is the controlled exposure of an organism to a sample that has the potential to be toxic. It integrates the interaction of all the chemicals present in a sample, unlike chemistry where you're looking to quantify a specific compound, and it's used to evaluate environmental conditions and risk. Test organisms act as a surrogate for those found in the natural environment, and we're taking a direct biological measurement. So our test outcome can be organism survival, growth, reproduction, for example, and ultimately we're measuring the potential ecological effect of a sample. And the goal is to see, does that sample exceed the established toxicity thresholds for that particular organism or endpoint? I throw around a lot of terms that are specific to toxicity testing, so I always like to take a moment to review a few of them and make it easier to follow along as I go. So when I say endpoint, I mean the measured response. So it could be survival, growth, reproduction, development, behavior, various biomarkers. When I say acute, I'm typically talking about a shorter duration test. We're usually looking at survival or mortality effects only. Chronic testing is generally a longer duration, although that's not always true. And in addition to survival, we're also looking at some kind of sublethal effect. So was the organism able to grow or reproduce normally? Critical life stage is a sensitive time in an organism's life. So we're usually not testing on hardy adult organisms. They're meant to be sensitive proxies. And so we're usually testing on gametes or larvae or the embryo stages of a test organism. When I say EC50, that's the concentration at which there's a response in 50% of the test organisms, EC being the effect concentration. LC50 is the concentration that kills 50% of the organisms, so LC is lethal concentration. NOEC, or no observed effect concentration, is the highest concentration of a material in a toxicity test that has no statistically significant adverse effect on the exposed population of the test organisms compared to the control. And then conversely, the LOEC, or lowest observed effect concentration, is the lowest concentration of a material in a toxicity test that has a statistically significant adverse effect on the exposed population of test organisms compared to the control. CV is the coefficient of variation. This is a standard statistical measurement of the relative variation of a distribution of a data set. And it's typically the standard deviation divided by the mean. We're going to talk more about this later. And then finally, PMSD is percent minimum significant difference. And so this is the smallest percentage decrease in an endpoint, so growth, reproduction, survival, from the control that could be determined to be statistically significant. So EPA promulgated 16 different methods for toxicity testing under 40 CFR Part 136, meaning they're codified in regulation. So thanks, Chris, for laying the groundwork on this morning. Note, however, that there are some validated and very widely used methods that were not ever codified. So an example of this would be the EPA 1995 West Coast Marine Manual that's used quite frequently in California, was never included in 40 CFR. The test methods must be followed as written, and the methods are included in NPDES permits when they're issued. In addition to the method manuals, there are several other resources that EPA has put forward to inform how toxicity testing is conducted and how data are interpreted, including documents containing method errata, additional guidance and recommendations, and a variability study, which I'll come back to later. And we also need to look at the individual NPDES permit requirements, since the way that the methods are applied can vary. When we're evaluating toxicity test data, there are several criteria that we use. So the first being test acceptability criteria. This tells us if the test met the minimum required criteria outlined in the method. So for example, did the control exposure have 90% or greater organism survival? Then we look at the test conditions and bench sheets. So we can look at the raw data that was collected and verify water quality parameters were within range for a particular species tolerance, or if there were any notable observations during the test period. In data analysis, we use a statistical program to calculate if any of the sample exposures were significantly different from the control. And we also assess the degree of variability or the degree of uncertainty associated with the test results. And then finally, reference toxicant test, or you might hear them called RefToxes or SRTs for standard reference toxicant tests, are maybe the least well understood and probably the one that we're going to spend the most time on today. And so reference toxicant tests can help us answer the question of, how do I know that a toxic response in a sample is due to constituents present and not just organisms being in poor health? And this is where we'll start talking about control charts. But first, what's a reference toxicant test? You might also hear it referred to as a positive control because it receives a treatment with a known result. So in other words, we're taking our test organisms and we are exposing them to something that we know and expect will be toxic to them so that we can measure the response. There's an excerpt here from the TNI wet module that says reference toxicants demonstrate a lab's ability to obtain consistent results and to evaluate the overall health and sensitivity of test organisms over time. Common toxicants include things like metals, ammonia, or even sodium for freshwater species that don't like a salty environment so much. The image that I've got here is a snapshot from CETUS. So this is the statistical software package that's typically used for toxicity testing. And it shows that for this test, copper chloride was the toxicant, and we used it on the purple sea urchin to see how it impacted their ability to successfully fertilize eggs. You can see a classic dose response, which means that with increasing concentrations of copper, you can see that the percent fertilization decreases. The required minimum frequency for reference toxicant testing can vary depending on specific method and permit requirements, the organism source, and accreditation conditions. So generally, a reference toxicant test is concurrent with sample testing if the permit requires it to be performed concurrently, or if the test organisms are wild caught as opposed to commercially cultured. They can be conducted monthly if the test organisms are cultured in-house, and or if that test type was performed by the lab sometime within that month. But if a test method is conducted only monthly or less frequently, a reference toxicant test must be performed concurrently with each effluent toxicity test. And then if the commercial organism supplier can provide their control chart data from at least the last 5 monthly reference toxicant tests, then the lab can do reference toxicant testing monthly. If the supplier can't provide control charts, then the reference toxicant test must be concurrent with the effluent test. And then lastly, in order to maintain accreditation for a particular parameter with California ELAP, you need at least one reference toxicant test annually for each method. Okay, so finally, what's a control chart? We're going to switch gears for a moment, and control charts are statistical tools used to track data performance over time. So the basic components are a center line. So this is our average or mean of the data. We have upper and lower control limits. So the warning limits are typically 2 standard deviations from the mean, and the action limits are typically 3 standard deviations from the mean. We have the data points that are collected over time and plotted, and then there's a time axis, right? So our sequence of sampling or measurement events. And control charts are used in nearly every industry, things like manufacturing, finance, service, and obviously environmental testing, because we want to ensure lab consistency. Some of the benefits include it provides us early warning of problems. It can help us support data-driven decisions. It can reduce waste and rework and improve quality and consistency and facilitate continuous improvement, which has been a big theme of this conference. For toxicity control charts specifically, they are showing us the sensitivity, quality, consistency of the test organism, trends in culture health, and the laboratory's overall performance over time. So they can demonstrate a lab's initial or ongoing proficiency with a method. They can help us detect out of control tests, which can show trends or shifts in organism response. They validate that organisms and procedures are functioning as expected, and they can help us diagnose variability or contamination in test systems. So put another way, they help ensure that any observed effects in toxicity tests are due to something present in the effluent and not random variation or poor test conditions. So in other words, that the biological test systems are under control. The results are plotted on control charts to track performance over time. So generally for toxicity testing, we're plotting the LC or EC50 or LC or EC25 for each endpoint. The mean is generated, and then 2 standard deviations and 3 standard deviations are displayed. And I should also mention that you may sometimes see certain kinds of data plotted on a logarithmic scale, which can help normalize the data, making trends easier to interpret. I kept my examples pretty simple and straightforward for today. Any data points that are outside of the bounds should be investigated, and the lab needs to have a standard procedure for addressing those out of range events. It's also worth noting that statistically, 1 out of every 20 data points is expected to be outside of 2 standard deviations just by chance. Also, reference toxicant data are a standard requirement for whole effluent toxicity testing, and they can be used in data interpretation. They're typically not a de facto criterion for test rejection, but reference toxicant data should be assessed and can provide additional context for results interpretation. So for example, if my effluent sample is considered statistically different from the control, and my reference toxicant test shows that this batch of test organisms was more sensitive than what's typical, there may be some question as to whether the observed toxic effect is real, and maybe a follow-up test is needed for confirmation. So in terms of what we're plotting, there needs to be a minimum of 5 data points to have a valid control chart, but typically a complete control chart will include data points for the last 20 tests of a particular type. The chart includes the grand mean of the data, as well as the bounds that show the 2 and 3 standard deviations from the mean. A given control chart also needs to represent tests that have the same conditions. So there should be 1 unique control chart for each combination of test species and test endpoint. So for example, you'll have separate control charts for top smelt survival and top smelt growth. And charts should represent the same test conditions for all points included. So tests that were conducted at the same temperature with the same dilution water, etc. If non-conforming data are going to be excluded from a control chart, the lab needs to have a documented reason for why. So this can include things like a documented observation of an excursion from the method requirements or test conditions on the bench, maybe a major temperature deviation. Can also include a failure to meet the method required test acceptability criteria. So it's potentially an invalid test. Or maybe the reference toxicant concentrations were incorrectly calculated. So when you're looking at a toxicity control chart, repeated out of control points can indicate laboratory problems like poor organism health, contamination in the test system, inconsistent environmental conditions, or poor analyst training or performance. And you might have a problem if you see a data point or more outside of the control limits, a run of points above or below the center line, some kind of observed trend like a run of points that's increasing or a run of points that's decreasing, or unusual or cyclical patterns, maybe some sort of seasonal effect. If you observe any of those, it should trigger a follow-up investigation and potentially a root cause analysis. Another one of the metrics that we can assess is what's called the control chart coefficient of variation, or CV, which is a measure of the consistency of the results. In 2000, EPA conducted a variability study of various toxicity methods to assess how much variability is inherent in the methods and the level of precision and reproducibility across different labs and test organisms, and establish acceptable CV ranges for test performance. So you may not be able to see all of the finer details on this slide, but the screenshot here is of 2 tables from the study document which show the guidance criteria that labs generally use for control chart CVs. So what's important to note is that CV goals vary by methods, so it's not the same number for Cereodaphnia reproduction as it is for sea urchin fertilization. And we most often use the 75th percentile CVs as the target threshold or warning limit. So let's see if we can pull all these pieces together by reviewing a couple examples. So this shows 3 control charts for the chronic fathead minnow 7-day survival endpoint. And based on what we know, take a minute and which would you say is the best and which is the worst? Or should I say which systems look under control or not? I will tell you that the EPA 75th percentile for chronic survival EC50 is 31%. So the chart on the left has a CV of 18%. The chart on the right has a CV of 32.7%. The center chart has a CV of 53%. So 18% is quite good. There's maybe a slight upward trend of points that we might want to take a closer look at. 32.7 is okay, but could be better. And a CV of 53% should make you want to raise your red flag. And there's also a downward trend of points there in the middle that we should take a closer look at. So the idea is the same here, except this time we're looking at chronic fathead minnow biomass data rather than survival. The target EPA 75th percentile for this endpoint is 26%. The chart on the left has a CV of 51%, yikes. The chart on the right has a CV of 26%. Okay, that's looking pretty good. There's maybe 1 point that's just outside of 2 standard deviations. And then the center chart has a CV of 18%, so well done. I want to leave you with a few tangible things that lab can implement related to toxicity control charts. And these are all things that we implement at Nautilus that I've personally found to be useful. So firstly, I'd suggest performing monthly internal reviews to make sure that all of the reference toxicant tests that needed to be performed that month were actually performed. It's helpful if you do this before the month ends so that in the event something has been missed or there was an invalid result, there's still time to conduct it. And you want to make sure during this monthly review that the CVs were in range of that 75th percentile and check if there are any trends that are starting to emerge in the data. I think it's also prudent to have an early detection and warning system for bench staff to be able to notify the QA team of any potentially non-conforming data. So in our lab, we have an email notification system that when analysts are working on bench data, they can send a note to QA for tests that are still in progress so that they can be closely monitored and potentially take immediate corrective actions. And as part of this system, you need to make sure that staff have an understanding of control charts and what typical organism responses look like so that they can recognize and report data anomalies quickly. And then lastly, be sure to investigate any excursions in a timely manner. The volume of testing and data, especially for commercial labs, can be quite high, and it can be tough to remember or even decipher good bench observations several weeks or months later. Part of what you should be evaluating are the test conditions. So were all of the requirements met? Were the samples and animals handled correctly? Were the test dilutions prepared accurately? And then use your root cause analysis techniques to implement and document corrective actions. And at this point, I will pause for any questions and give a big thanks to Leanne and Nock and the ELAP team and all of the conference planning chairs.
Thank you so much for your presentation on control charts, Katie. We do have one question. How is development and behavior measured? How is the baseline organism defined?
Good question. I will say for most of the toxicity tests that are typically included in NPDES permits, we're usually looking at survival, or we're looking at a sublethal endpoint that can be easily measured, so growth or weight or fertilization. You don't see the behavioral endpoints a whole lot for NPDES compliance, and it's honestly not something that we run into a whole lot. So I don't know that I have a great answer to that question.
Thank you so much again, Katie. So we've made it to our final training session of the ELAP bootcamp. One last mission before we wrap up and head back to base. Before we part ways, let's focus on a strategic command level skill, management review. Just like a mission debrief, it's where reflection meets planning. This closing session is all about using management reviews as a powerful planning tool to streamline lab operations and drive continuous improvement. Leading this final charge is Surjit Sani, the laboratory manager at Valley Water, a seasoned expert who knows how to turn oversight into opportunity and align your lab's efforts with a clear sense of purpose. With a combined experience of over 30 years working for both privately held laboratories and drinking water public utility, Surjit has hands-on experience with a variety of sophisticated laboratory equipment and is well-versed in implementing quality assurance programs. This session will leave you with actionable insights to strengthen your lab's game plan long after this bootcamp ends. Let's finish strong, and please welcome Surjit Sani to the stage.
Good morning, everyone. We're just about at midday and at the final presentation for Elap Con 2025. It is an honor to be speaking at this conference, and I would like to begin by thanking the Elap team for planning this annual event. I'm also grateful for the opportunity to share our lab story, specifically our journey in planning and creating a structure for a purposeful, strategic management review process. My name is Surjit Sani, and I'm the Laboratory Services Manager at Santa Clara Valley Water District, also known as Valley Water. Next slide, please. In our lab, we began exploring the management review process back in 2018, well before the TNI standard was formally adopted by ELAP. At that time, it was a voluntary initiative. Our intent was to proactively explore answers to one question. Why is this review important? And how could we meet the standard's 11 requirements in a way that was comprehensive and efficient for our lab? We wanted to look beyond simply checking a box. We wanted to learn how this added real value, supported improvement, and aligned with the way that we were already reviewing and managing quality and other processes in our lab. Now that we've been doing this for 8 years and continually changing it for the better, this process has proven to be more than just an exercise. It has become a useful tool. Fast forwarding to today, as management review is now a regulatory requirement, I encourage you to all reflect on the same question. Why is management review process important for your lab? Let's explore answers to this question together as I share our lab story. First and foremost, it's important because it's required. Secondly, it includes topics that we found helpful for lab operations. These provided insights and helped us draft roadmaps for change and improvements. Notice some of the underlying text in section 415.1. Predetermined schedule and procedure, participation from top management, periodic review, ensure continuing suitability and effectiveness, to introduce necessary changes and improvements. Also, commitment to continual improvement is a core principle referenced throughout the TNI standard. Top management's involvement is explicitly required to ensure that the review is strategic and effective. We found that when done correctly, it is a purpose-driven process, not just a procedural checkbox. Then in 415.2, the standard requires that findings and actions be documented, and again emphasizes commitment that these activities are conducted in a timely manner. Documenting helps to create ownership and buy-in. In understanding each requirement of management review, there were a lot of times when we had to go back to the drawing board, whether it was for one requirement or more. Each time we brainstormed or collected input from the team, we tried to stay focused on answering the same foundational question. Why is this review important? What value does it bring to our lab? For us, this question continues to remain central. We review it during every management review meeting, and we've found that this practice is a powerful way to maintain staff engagement and ensure that all levels of staff, including top management, remains focused on the purpose and impact of this process. In our journey, this process helped us to go through numerous transitions that go beyond the minimum standard requirements. Whether that was planning for a new LIMS system, a new document control system, lab operations through the COVID-19 pandemic, or planning for use of new technologies. We found that a structured framework for reflecting, planning, and adaptation is the key. Now, as Nak mentioned at the opening of this conference, systems are not built overnight. Capturing the lessons learned along the way strengthen our quality management system. Now, this brings us to another important question. Is there a strategy on how to approach management review? Can we make it more efficient and impactful? The answer is yes. Strategically structuring this process helped us to have a deeper dive. Some of the questions that we asked ourselves looked like this. What are the type of operational and quality trends important to our lab? Will it help to reveal any gaps in understanding of data integrity or compliance? Will this help with effective management of change? How will stakeholder feedback play into this? How do we document this? And can this documentation serve as an informational archive for our future use? Lots of questions to ask. And we know that not all labs are the same, and not all tools and solutions apply equally. Strategic planning for specific needs help to plan and envision the roadmap. Of course, it is a balance between regulatory requirements, operational goals, and organizational priorities. The reality is, balance is not something you find. It is something you create. In the next few slides, we will share the story of how we tried to create our balance, and we are continuing to do so. The standard requires minimum annual requirement for this review. It is up to the labs to come up with how that works for us. Is calendar year better? Or does fiscal year align better? Or maybe there is a need to do this review more frequently. We started it at semi-annual. But now this plan, we do it over a fiscal year and have sorted topics that will be covered each quarter. Some topics are annual and some are reviewed every quarter. For example, review of policies and procedures is an annual meeting focused only on this topic, and resource review is done quarterly. Next question, who attends? The standard says top management. The lab defines their top management. Who else needs to be a part of this review? Managers, supervisors, any key staff, maybe some stakeholders or contributors. Different staff may be invited to review different parts of the plan. This all needs to be predetermined and planned out. In our lab, similar to internal audits, we maintain an annual roadmap to management review that covers what topics will be reviewed and when. Since the plan is prepared before the beginning of fiscal year, We include the expectation for staff to participate in the review process in their annual work plan. This also ensures that expectations are clearly communicated across the team. And this proactive approach has not only increased engagement, but also has helped to ensure that the review activities stay on schedule and are completed effectively. In predetermining the plan, it is good to look into flexibility for attendees. Perhaps there will be better engagement with hybrid meetings than virtual, or vice versa. As a lab, we can decide. For our lab, we prefer to have these meetings in person. Next slide, please. So earlier, we talked about documentation. Why is it important? Well, because it captures decisions and actions. How we plan to document is up to us, up to the labs, as long as some structure is in place. You could use templates, checklists, reports, presentations, or any other method that fits your process. As Mohan covered earlier in this presentation today, the standard outlines 11 minimum requirements for what must be reviewed during management review. From lab's review and from lab's view, when we take a closer look at these elements, they're not isolated checkpoints. In fact, they are interconnected in a very intentional way. And when viewed together, they begin to fit like pieces of a puzzle. Each part supports the next. As an example, audit findings often reveal gaps that requires corrective actions. Corrective actions may signal broader trends in training, documentation, or resource allocations. PT results reflect the effectiveness of methods and analyst competence, which can reveal the effectiveness of training and standard operating procedures. When these requirements are examined collectively, they form a comprehensive view of how the lab is performing. Earlier, we talked about looking beyond minimum requirements of management review. It is important to think about any organizational OKRs, KPIs, KQIs, or even the KRIs that can be linked to what is already being reviewed during this process. We have observed that it is a telescopic and a microscopic view, and thanks to AI for coming up with this creative image. Another example of looking beyond for us was vendor evals. Collecting evals is a requirement, but how and when does that get reviewed? In our lab, we decided to include vendor evals in management review. The reason is decision may need to be made on operational needs, budget needs, or other constraints. It has also helped us to routinely review and determine critical and non-critical vendors. Let's look at another example. Standard requirements call for performing a review of resources. And as Mohan called it earlier in his presentation, adequacy of resources. Let's say the review highlights dependency of lab on a single ICP-MS analyst who is considering to retire. Typically, labs have a plan to address these type of changes. But where is this plan documented? Is it discussed in management review or elsewhere? In our lab, we've decided to use Kappa system to document all action items that result from management review, including any opportunities for improvement. This way, they become a part of the process that is already getting reviewed on a routine basis. So going back to the scenario, let's say we've identified the actions that are needed and we prepare the action plan, which could include cross-training staff, double fill, if possible, if there are resources. Such action plan not only provides greater business continuity, but might be useful to review if the situation happens again. Next, we will review example of a feedback loop that originates from and ends with management review process, and we will use vendor evals as an example. So review of customer feedback let's take a look at customer feedback. So review of customer feedback is a requirement. Let's look at an example of a feedback loop involving customer feedback. We use 5 main categories to analyze and look at the possibilities. So there could be a simple review comment from our customer feedback that may not need any further action. It could be an opportunity for improvement that we might want to explore further. It might sound like an inquiry or complaint that we would want to move to inquiry or complaint handling process, or it might necessitate a corrective or preventive action. Results of all these categories will get pulled out of their individual silos. Connection to escalation process, if applicable, and then it makes back to the next management review. And the cycle continues. These loops may look different from lab to lab. So again, you define what your balance is. So next, how do we align this? The standard does not explicitly require a SWOT analysis, but we found that it closely aligns. Strengths can shed light on what is working well, or your accreditation, internal audits, workflows, etc. Weaknesses will show where performance lags, equipment problems, inefficiencies, training, etc. Opportunities are areas for growth and improvement, such as emerging technologies, new ideas. Threats can be internal or external risks, such as regulatory changes, budget constraints, cybersecurity issues, etc. Once SWOT analysis is done, we can move on to strategize and establish acceptable score for different areas that get reviewed. For example, on the internal audit plan, do you expect your team to complete 100% of the planned audits? What is an acceptable completion rate? Similarly, what is the completion rate that's acceptable for staff on assigned trainings? We need to strategize on our lab's risk appetite when there are no clear regulatory requirements. So here are 10 tips from our experience in developing metrics for scoring. First, if you can't measure it, you cannot manage it. Measurement data helps to track performance over time and identify trends. The data should be meaningful and provide insights that support decision-making and improvement. It must be accurate and verified. It should be timely and reflect current performance to remain relevant for action. It should cover all required aspects. For example, if a process touches multiple requirements, then the collective and comprehensive performance should be reviewed. The plan should lead to clear next steps, be actionable, whether corrective, preventive, or opportunities for improvement. Metrics should be relevant. This is one of my favorites, actually. Data should align with lab's objectives, scope of accreditation, and quality system priorities, not just collected for the sake of completion and filling in the blanks. Next, it needs to be consistent. The same methods, formats, and criteria should be used across cycles to support valid trend analysis and performance tracking. For example, if seeking to trend changes in volume and type of work, then criteria needs to be pre-planned. Before using data for decision-making, data needs to be reviewed and verified as free of entry errors, duplicates, or any missing information. Review for some elements may need to be balanced by including both quantitative data and qualitative data to get the full picture. In doing all this, the end goal that we're all striving for is improvement. Improvement can be measured for a single process or overall effectiveness of the management system, or other criteria that is important for the lab. What we need to recognize is that there will be patterns. For an example, if a lab continues to deliver customer data on time and has 100% on-time delivery, then they will be doing the same line on the graph, and it is a good thing. The process that shows occasional improvement is also good. However, it would be good to correlate the doing the same and occasional improvement to other linked processes to get an overall picture if this is in fact improvement. Continuous improvement is a great concept and a cycle. However, practically and graphically, this only selectively applies to processes and may help to analyze a specific situation. Continual improvement is my favorite. I find it more realistic in the lab world, and when managing processes, there may be a time when an improvement is made. As an example, you switch to a new document control system. There will be a period after the change when we have to standardize, and staff needs to be trained, hiccups get identified and resolved. Once the normalizing is reached, innovation with new ideas might happen. Over time, internal or external factors may kick in, which result into setbacks. For example, during the COVID-19 pandemic, many labs experienced resource issues, supply chain issues, which impacted operational priorities. When strategically managed in a continuous improvement or continual improvement in this context, in the continual improvement cycle, the organization recovers quickly and standardizes to the change and continues to improve over time. We have seen at least a dozen benefits that I would like to share with you. A structured management review helps to set clear direction for evaluating lab performance and short-term and long-term goals. It ensures timely, consistent, and clear expectations. The process supports informed decision-making using data from audits, trends, or other quality elements. It is a good venue to discuss resource needs and staffing, equipment, and training needs. It strengthens risk management through review of potential operational, compliance, and reputational risks. By connecting processes and reviewing data holistically, promotes efficiency and cost savings. Staff sees their input reflected in lab-wide decisions and improvements, which promotes staff engagement. This also involves stronger leadership accountability through clear involvement of top management. As our keynote speaker emphasized yesterday, this is valuable in driving an improvement culture, valuing diversity, and finding balance with organizational strategy. The discussions during this review bring opportunities for innovation, ideas for automation, workflow redesign, or new testing capabilities. The process overall improves regulatory readiness as proactive compliance posture, which reduces last-minute scrambles during assessments. It is also documented evidence of continual improvement, which supports the standards requirements and tells the story of progress and intent. When structured and continually improved, it becomes a framework that is synchronous and sustainable. And we are still counting more benefits than these dozen that I have shared with you. So with that, conclude my presentation, and I'm open to any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, Surjit, for that wonderful presentation. We do have a question. For a lab that hasn't done a meaningful management review before, where should they start?
So again, I will go back to sharing our story. You have to start at some point. Begin with the minimum requirements. Begin with answering the questions to how do we address the minimum requirements, and then how you take it beyond those minimum requirements and roll them into routine processes.
Thank you so much again, Surjit. And just like that, day 2 of Elap Conference is complete. You've gone beyond the basics, tackled complexity head on, and added some serious new skills to your toolkit. Congratulations, you've officially completed the 2025 Elap Conference Bootcamp. We've tackled evolving regulations, sharpened our tools for compliance, explored real-world enforcement perspectives, and strengthened our quality systems from the inside out. Whether you're heading back to the lab, the field, or the office, you're leaving here better equipped, more informed, and ready to lead with purpose into the year. A heartfelt thank you to all of our presenters, partners, and of course, you, the dedicated professionals who make California's environmental laboratories stronger every single day. We hope today's advanced sessions energize your work and elevate your practice. On behalf of the entire ELAP team, stay mission ready, stay connected, and keep pushing for excellence. We'll see you next time. ELAP 2025 conference dismissed.